All right, with that, let's get started. Please go ahead and advance the slide. All right, well, hi everyone. My name is Josephine Puffpuff, she, her pronouns. As I shared earlier, I am based in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, along with some of my panelists today. I'm a member of the Housing Justice Collective. For those of you who may be new to our collective, we are a collaborative of experienced organizers, facilitators, technical assistants, and national housing policy consultants who work with communities to transform systems towards housing justice. The Housing Justice Collective believes that in order to achieve housing justice, individuals, groups, and systems must explicitly center people experiencing oppression and working towards collective healing. One of the ways we practice that is in the way we show up in our communities and in the way we partner with folks with lived experience, which is why we're gathered here today. So super happy to share some of that learning that's reflected in this group. We are, and I just want to name Anna and Kim, just want to shout out, thank you to the technical support staff from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And of course, Sarah Hunter, my colleague from Housing Justice Collective, is also here in the background. She will be hooking us up with some links and checking in on chat and engaging folks as things come up. That's right, heart and fire, always, Hunter. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this webinar is part of a series of learning opportunities in addition to the resources created to support communities in implementing equitable resources to addressing COVID-19 within the homeless and housing field. This slide deck does at the end include additional resources to check out, but Sarah, if you could plug that link one more time in the chat for folks who aren't as familiar with the housing equity framework. If you're interested in checking out additional resources that have been put out over the last 2 years, you will find great resources that are related to what it means to advance racial justice and equity in your work, strategies on addressing the highest need first and really thinking locally about what that means, growing partnerships, getting folks into housing and keeping them in housing, and what it means to act quickly. The framework itself is just a phenomenal document, and the additional resources that have been developed in partnership with some of our panelists today are just great resources to help get regrounded, to kind of be inspired, and to seek out communities that are doing really concrete work related to those guiding strategies. If you could advance the slide again, please. Thank you. This body of work continues to be and was in collaboration with the partner organizations you see here on the slide. So just take a minute and soak in all those beautiful logos and think about who you know and the relationships that you have tied to these organizations. In implementing equitable resources, as I said before. So if folks are wondering who is behind the scenes in this work, these are some of the partners there. Again, you can check out more at that Housing Equity Framework link as well. Thank you. So next slide. Thank you. So we are here. Oh, one more back, Kim. I always do that when I'm advancing slides. I never know why. So we are here specifically to focus on the topic of integrating lived experience in the framework for an equitable COVID-19 homelessness response. The body of work includes some documentation on lessons learned, the process in which this group and others that were involved in the work took to build a team and to create, co-design, and implement a storytelling project and some additional resources. We aren't actually spending time on the specific document, so I just want to touch base about what it was, what's included, and if folks are interested, Sarah's going to add the link to the specific product. There, we lay out the way in which recruitment occurred, the time and depth of advisory engagement on these products, what compensation and support structure look like, what the work itself and the process look like, and kind of go a little deeper in roles and responsibilities. I'm also aware, as I participated in some of the and some of the websites as well, and some of the webinars, that folks are super into spending more time thinking about like concrete compensation structures. How do we address the way in which we provide support? What does partnership and collaboration look like in terms of job descriptions or advisory descriptions? That is not what we're here to do. We're here to do something, I think, even more experiential, where the panelists today, who were, as I said, all members of the framework consulting team and professionals with lived expertise, over the last year, spent time working together and spent time co-creating and developing these products. And so today we have chosen to spend the time kind of looking backwards, right? Like reflecting on how well did we do leaning into our values? How well did we like, to what extent did we achieve that sort of co-design, that collaboration value that was so important to us? What was the experience like? And what is some guidance and wisdom we want to share with folks, sort of paired with some of the concrete resources that are already in existence? So with that, let me tell you who our panelists are. And Sarah, I'm just going to pause real quick, see what is happening in chat. I thought I saw some questions. Oh, great. Folks are asking for that document. Sarah has added the links to both the specific integrating lived experience and expertise into the framework, and then also the storytelling link, which is one of the products that this team and others did. Let's see. Okay, great. Thanks, Sarah, as always, on fire, leading in the chat. So what we've planned for you today is really, once we've done introductions of who the panelists are, we've organized our discussion and our reflections in 3 parts that really touch on how shared power showed up in collaboration and relationship, sort of what are some of the principal struggles we dealt with doing this work through sort of the initial time of COVID, and the racial justice movement that happened, not just because of, but really as the tipping point being George Floyd's murder. We, of course, will invite you into conversation through chat, and we'll pause. We'll do our best with such a beautiful large group to hear how folks are thinking about what this means for their work and how they'll take it back into community. And then we also just always welcome folks just reflecting and asking questions, and we'll do our best to answer them in real time. And then we'll close, we'll say goodbye. I want a few more sun emojis to carry me on my way, and then we'll shut the webinar down. Awesome. All right, well, let's meet our panelists. Let's do that. All right, so our first one of 3 is Laquita Limbo, who's also a Minnesota resident. Laquita is the chair of the SMAC Directors Council. SMAC is 5 counties that come together to make one suburban continuum of care, and is the interim vice chair of Anoka Heading Home, which is a prevention and their prevention and outreach subcommittee. Laquita is also a member of the SHIP collaborative that's leading some regionalization on responding to homelessness in the Twin Cities, and is a resident of Minnesota by way of Mississippi, and is the proud mother of an 11-year-old who is demanding all hot meals while distant learning from home right now. Laquita is a person with lived experience who's currently pursuing a degree in criminal history and hopes to lessen the distractions of racism and classism in the pursuit of housing justice. And yeah, right. And Laquita has a favorite quote to share by way of introducing her. So here we go. It is important to know who the real enemy is and to know the very serious function of racism, which is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reasons for being. Thanks, Laquita. If you have the who said that, please share that in chat. Riviana is another one of our panelists. Hi, Rivi, who's also a housing justice collective colleague. But prior to Housing Justice Collective, Riviana worked for True Colors United, where they worked on building the power of young people with lived experience in the movement to end homelessness. They were a founding member of the National Youth Forum on Homelessness, where they provided technical assistance for the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project. Thank you, Laquita. also known as YHDP, helping communities all over the country build youth action boards. Formerly, they did outreach and positive youth development work at the Los Angeles LGBT Center. They served on Youth Collaboratory's board of directors and is a graduate of Mills College and City College of San Francisco, currently residing in Brooklyn, New York. Yeah. Then we have Rachel. Rachel, I can't tell if you are on or off camera, but if you are off, if you could say hello to everyone. Oh, holla, did you see that, Rivy? Mills College over here. Rachel is a natural leader who was heavily sought after for their work in his hometown in Louisville, Kentucky, with the Vision Russell Neighborhood Development and Revitalization Project, where he was a key component in the city winning a housing and urban development grant worth more than $32 million for his neighborhood's economic development plan. In his role with his project, Rachel mobilized the community and used his position to advocate for better economic, social, and community improvements for over 10,000 residents. Now a resident of Minneapolis, Minnesota, with a master's in business administration, Rachel's work includes financial literacy, home ownership advocacy, and education for urban league cities, wealth development intersection. And Rachel currently serves as president of the Urban League Twin Cities Young Professional Chapter and does digital media production for some of their body of work that includes a town hall real talk and a biweekly virtual job fair. Outside of work, Rachel sits on the board as vice president of Elliott Park Neighborhood, and is the Building, Land Use, and Housing Committee's vice chair. Also serves on the board of Change Inc., which is an alternative school based in Northeast Minneapolis and St. Paul, and also sits on numerous other race and equity-based boards. Rachel has been recognized as a 2018 Rising Young Professional by the Minnesota Finance and Commerce, and aims to bring his talents and knowledge of resources to change system and uplift the next generation of leaders and doers. So awesome to know these folks as I'm reading bios. And lastly, Tiffany Hayes is based in Virginia by way of Jamaica. She is
Check your email. Sorry.
Oh no! Oh yeah, that's what. Oh, I see. I'm reading it, but maybe you. Oh, there we go. I got it. I think I got the newest one. She has experience navigating the child welfare system as a parenting undocumented young person. Her housing advocacy started in 2014 when Tiffany transitioned out of the child welfare system into housing instability. Tiffany has had a national, state, and local impact on child welfare and homelessness policy practice. Denise has a national, state, and local impact on child welfare and homelessness policy, practice, research, and organizing. Tiffany has advised the Virginia Department of Social Services and Richmond DSS on their 5-year prevention plan and other important topics related to practice and implementation. Tiffany has also advised and informed the Virginia Commission on Youth and Issues that impact youth involvement in the child welfare system, and has served as in a reviewer capacity for the United Nations Global Campaign on LGBTQ youth homelessness. Tiffany currently serves on the National Youth Forum on Homelessness, serves as an policy advocacy co-chair for Virginia's Youth Housing Stability Coalition, and does federal work around Division X provisions of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, and works in the affordable housing development realm to provide affordable home ownership opportunities for low to medium income communities and communities of color. All that to say, beyond these humans being just magical in their own right, came to the work of the framework with just some depth in systems, some depth in policy and research, and what it means to organize both at a local level and advocate within the systems that exist. This group is absolute fire. So excited that they said yes to sitting in reflection on the products they created and the work of the framework over the last 1.5 years. And excited to jump into some of the things that came up and what we thought was important to share here. All right, y'all ready? Give me a thumbs up, give me a shimmy, show me you're here. Awesome. Thank you. All right. And if you could advance the slide, please, Kim, thank you. All right. So part one, we spent some time talking about what was the work we did together, right? Like we spent some time thinking about specifically the storytelling project and really sat with these two questions. One, let's talk about the experience of being invited into the work, right? So we know part of this process is about outreach, recruitment, inviting in, onboarding. So we wanted to spend some time thinking about, but what was that experience like? What was important for you in how you were invited into that work? And then what was important for you about what it meant to co-create and develop something from the beginning to the end versus being invited somewhere along the way to provide feedback or input about what was being created. So I offered up to this group. I would love for someone to kick it off. And Laquita, I see you getting off mic. Let's go.
All right. So for me, I would say it was a very healing experience. It was good to come into something, being able to give my perspective, give not only my experience as a person with lived experience, but using other avenues that I've had expertise in. It was very, very healing for me. Because you don't know how your trauma has impacted you or how you've healed from your trauma until you use that to step outside of yourself for a greater purpose. And so it was just an overall awesome experience.
Yeah, I remembered you talking about when we were reflecting on that too, about it was healing for you, but also like healing in the way of like challenging existing mindsets, challenging the ways that you were holding the work or what it meant to be part of the work. Would you say a little bit more about that?
Yes. So in changing my mindset, I came into life in general, just thinking people that are homeless are, lazy, they're uneducated, they have some sort of drug or chemical dependency or mental illness until I became homeless. And so when that happened to me, my mindset completely changed because I'm college educated, I'm a mother, I was gainfully employed when I became homeless. And so I had to really step back and think, okay, so if I'm this way, how many other people are put in boxes? And how can I help show people with lived experience in a different light? Because not everyone has a drug or chemical dependency problem. Not everyone has a mental illness. Not everyone is unemployed. Life happens. And you're only one incident away from having life completely go upside down. And so it was good to be able to shift my mindset in order to help other people.
Love it. Tiffany, I saw you shaking your head. What was coming up for you as you're listening in?
No, I definitely can agree with Laquita in that there is a stigma around homelessness and housing instability, when in actuality it's a bigger issue, more of a systems issue, and being able to like tackle solutions from that perspective instead of trying to put individual ownership on a widespread issue. But to answer your question, that those questions that are on the screen, for me, it was a refreshing experience. And it was really excited to just like reconnect and connect with other people who had lived expertise, and then as well as professionals in the field, doing this work on a larger scale. In addition to that, it was also nice knowing that as I stepped into the space, my expertise was valued, and I could also come into that space being true to myself, not having to alter that, and knowing that me being raw and honest is what's going to create the change that we want to see. In addition to that, coming into the space with very intersectional identities, as being an a Black woman, an immigrant Black woman, or formerly immigrant, I'm a citizen now, whoop, whoop, okay. But immigrant Black woman, immigrant parenting Black woman, who also has had system involvement, and knowing how all of those experiences impact how I was able to, navigate housing instability, and navigate resources. And so one major thing for me that I did want to focus in on was how this issue also correlates with like system proximity and so it's a lot wanting to see that impact and change and knowing that this was a space that I could do that and not be restricted. So
Rivi, I'm curious, as someone sort of who was holding the process, right? Staffing the process, and listening to some of Laquita and Tiffany's reflections, like what were you holding it when you take yourself back to what it meant to invite folks into this space and truly lean into the values we were holding?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, I think holding the work of building this lived experience storytelling project was unlike any other work I have ever done. I think like up until that point, we had been working in the Twin Cities for quite a while with the group that's now known as the SHIP Collaborative, group of people with lived experience across the Twin Cities. And so much of the work was like, what are your visions for how to rebuild this system? Like what are these really kind of tactile like impacts that we can have as a group in terms of like shifting our systems to be the way we want to see them? And that work, I think, has been deeply impactful. And from the get-go, that was the vibe of what we were doing together. And then we had this opportunity for this storytelling project, and it kind of forced us all to say, like, what does it mean for a group of people in the Twin Cities to come together and say, like, what do we want people to know about what it means to live here, about what it means to experience homeless or housing instability here, and how do we want to convey that story? So much of our time was spent like kind of really starting from scratch, in terms of even just deciding what the medium was going to be, like in terms of asking, like, what are the questions that we want this project to ask, and what do we want people to know about both, you know, at this time, we had started it in 2021, and you know, across the nation, people are seeing images of huge like communities coming together in civil unrest in the Twin Cities and saying, like, how do we tell the story of that stuff and also tell the story of like big community resilience? And so I think I found it hugely meaningful to say, like, we didn't have an end goal in mind in terms of like what we were going to produce, right? We had to kind of open a door that led to 20 more doors that we would open in terms of like how we wanted this to portray these stories. So we ended up like, folks ended up interviewing each other. We made a big set of agreements around how that would work, including things like, you know, acknowledging that housing or housing instability is not just one issue, right? But that people come from various walks of life, various backgrounds, and that needed to be respected as folks were interviewing each other and kind of making the content for this video. But as we move forward, it was like, okay, we have this video, then people would be like, oh, I also wrote this song that feels applicable here. I also wrote this poem that feels applicable here. I've made some visual art that feels like a part of this too. And so it kind of unfolded into this thing that was kind of a collage of sorts that felt reflective of the stories that people were telling.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing too is just the level of ownership then that leads to for folks who feel like they are really a part of the beginning and the end, and the now what, so what of a product, right? Of whatever comes out of that work. Vachel, I'm curious what is coming up for you, or some of the things that we had reflected in thinking about what it means to be in a space that there's that equity and parity, and like what we are going to do here together.
Absolutely. So I'll start by just going back to my first experience and opportunity with doing community engagement housing work, which was back home in Louisville, Kentucky. And as it pertains to being invited to do the work, I worked for an organization that was in the community, but I also lived in the neighborhood. I worshiped in the neighborhood, and I worked in the neighborhood. So I was the perfect token person they need to be able to get those fundings, right? However, the difference between when I was younger, 24, 25 years old, right out of college, prior to college, I was just playing sports. So this is my first real career opportunity. So of course I jumped into it because I had housing insecurity in the past when I was in high school and as a college student dealing with slum landlords in college at HBCU. So I wanted to get into this work and I wanted to get into this space, but I didn't have the experience and the knowledge around what was really happening, what was going on. So it wasn't until after we got the $32 million like that you talked about in my bio, Josephine, where I saw people becoming displaced after we got the money for the revitalization and renovation. Now we had to, move those folk who were in the projects to make sure that they had somewhere safe to go while the construction and the demolition was happening. So as I left back home, because the opportunity started to slow down as the funding was given to us, I chose to come here to Minnesota, pursue my education, grow and learn a little bit more. And it was here and with this project where it was my first opportunity to be able to start on something from scratch. Like Riv said, the difference between being tokenized and work, again, you're not at the table making the decisions, you're not planning, you're not strategizing, but you have the voice, you have the intellect, you have the experience, you have everything that we need to fit all the boxes, to check all the checklists and boxes. So the difference between that and this, why I wanted to come into this work, because I saw the opportunity, even though initially I wanted younger Black men who were currently in housing, transitional, youth home housing transitional programs to be a part of this, to give their story. I realized that from my position of working in housing and finances currently and my lived experiences, and how I was able to overcome those barriers and get to where I am now was something that I could bring to the table for others within the collective and within the community in general. So I look at this opportunity as an opportunity for me to be able to sit at the table, be a part of the project from start to finish, being valued, being heard, being recognized, being compensated, all these different things. And I'd say that to say that there's a difference between being a partner in the project and being a participant in a project. And for me, just being able to have those opportunities in addition to being able to hear other experiences and perspectives, because we know it's not one size fits all. And we know there's not one underlying issue that leads us to where we are today as far as homelessness and housing instability. So hearing those other conversations, hearing what's happening in other counties throughout the state, learning about the good experiences as well. What have we learned? How have we, how has this shaped who we are?
Yeah.
And just how can we continue to empower, uplift each other, and be the change that we want to see. So that's really what led me to want to jump into this work and stick through it. It's been over a year since we've been together as a group, so I did really apply it. Thank you.
Yeah, Rachel, and I just want to name, I feel like something that you are so consistent about in the work that we have been doing and the other work you're doing is that you are always asking the question of like, and how does this help my broader community? How do I take this and apply it to 5 other places that are related to this thing that we're doing? And I appreciate that. And I also am like that is such a part of your value is like, what does this mean for the next person coming? What does this mean for the next person coming? And to your point about being the difference between a partner and a participant, our second question was like, so what was important to you then as a co-creator? And what is important to you now when you think about what it means to be a partner, what it means to co-create versus just give feedback or just offer input? What is the power manifested in that?
I appreciate that question. For me personally, again, because I'm no longer in that struggle how I used to be, and there still are people in that struggle who have the voice, who have the experiences and the knowledge to give back to help create change and solve problems. However, for me personally, I saw this as an opportunity for me to take a step back, to let others with less voice, less power, have the space to share their experiences, thoughts, and ideas. And also being that role model, being that resource, someone who's currently employed, who can provide resources, and then being someone who made it out of that challenge and that barrier. How can I be a role model and a resource at the same time for those who, again, like you said, may be on similar, rougher paths than what I've experienced? And then, remembering and staying grounded on everyone is treated equally and is a leader, showing that through not just talking, but showing it through, being through action, being on these calls, sharing my journey, but also, muting my mic make a space for others to be able to share their experiences, being respectful to people's privacy situations, that's how you build relationships with folks. That's how you're able to gain trust and things like that. Staying open-minded and listening to learn rather than to respond, for me, was one of the biggest takeaways.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm gonna mute myself, see if anyone wants to jump in.
All right. So for me, what was important is that tokenism was left at the door. Like that was so important for me, because a lot of times agencies will have good intentions, but they have the tendency to want to make decisions for us without us. And so being a BIPOC person, being a person with lived experience, the best intentions pave the road to hell, for lack of a better word. So you can have the best intentions, but like, if you've never lived it, if you've never seen it up close and personal, if you've never had a friend or family member to have that experience, you can't tell me what it's like. You can't tell me, oh, well, $13 an hour should, get you as far as you need to go in life. Like that was so important for me, is to be able to not be just a placeholder and fill these boxes of, oh, she's Black, oh, she's a woman, oh, she's a single mother. Like to step outside of those check boxes and to be able to have a voice and give a voice. As Rachel said, it's so important to be able to give voices to those who aren't able to speak for themselves or don't feel confident enough to speak for themselves. And I just want to say, I want to be more like Rachel when I grow up, as far as muting my mic and listening a little bit more. And it was good to also have ownership of what was happening. Like, I feel like the passion came through, like there was more of a push, more of a drive, because I felt like it was my baby. I was birthing something.
Thank you.
Yeah. I know. I think it's no coincidence too that we refer to this as lived experience storytelling project. I think that, there is a legacy of like people with lived experiences of homelessness involvement in the work, historically kind of beginning and ending at telling their story or being asked to tell their story, often for fundraising purposes, often for any number of reasons that all kind of equate to being exploited or being tokenized, right? And so I think a kind of guiding value in this was like, how do we kind of flip that on its head and say, like, what does it mean for people with lived experience to lead what that storytelling looks like and lead like how those stories are used? So it's like, what we all know that storytelling can be a very important tool, but I think it's a very kind of sticky issue in our line of work because of how often that kind of thing gets exploited. So like, what does it truly mean for people to have agency over the stories they tell and over how those stories are used?
Yeah, I love naming that for what it is. It is a sticky, right? Like we know that it's such a powerful tool in the way people come to an issue and the way people sit with what is possible regarding an issue, and yet it can still be harmful if it's not done in a thoughtful way. Tiffany, what you thinking over there? You're on mute.
I think Laquita and Rivi already spoke on one of the main things that I wanted to lift up was like ownership in the work and the change. In addition to that, I don't know, the respect of my identity coming into the space. I just wanted to lift that up again, but ownership was like one of the key takeaways. Or what was important. In addition to that, I pride myself on being able to show up as myself, and I can't express that enough. I think Laquita had mentioned at one point, maybe not having a code switch, not having to put on this whole different identity just to step into the space and do the work, the important work. In addition to that is me, I like when I come into a space knowing that there's going to be actionable change and we're just not having conversation. I think conversation is very important when it comes to informing people about experiences and informing change. But there's also that process that you got to do something with what's being what's being shared. I kind of like the concept that people use in any kind of like human services process or anything that deals with like information and data. Only take what you need, and it has to be like it's when you receive it, it's used for a purpose and not just like sitting there, right? We use that in healthcare. We use that in so many different aspects, and I think that also needs to be applied. I mean, not to a certain extent, of course, like authentic engagement, you don't want to cut people off just when you got what you need. But I guess what I'm saying is like, don't exploit me. And so I think that's the big, I don't think I know, that's the bigger point that I'm bringing to this conversation. So ownership, respecting my identity, and actionable change. And yeah.
Thank you so much for the reflections on what that, right, like how you define that experience of being a co-designer, a collaborator, and like the way in which self-agency and the power within ourselves kind of get to show up and actually help build right relationships with each other as we think about how to do the work together. We use this as a way of coming back to ourselves when we were getting ready for this webinar. So Kim, if you could help us advance, right? Let's pause and just remind ourselves and remind folks that have joined in on this conversation, like, and what does this have to do with transformation, right? We are all about system transformation and housing system transformation. What does this body of work and this value of integrating community members with lived expertise from the start with power to design and define what happens, what does that have to do with housing justice to y'all, to each of you?
Well, for me, it's telling the system that's created for the dominant white male culture that this is not good for everybody. It's good for maybe 2% of the people. And for us to have voices and to be able to transform policies and to make a difference is what's needed. And so, but I wanted to make a point before we moved on to this.
Yeah.
For people who do use storytelling, to be mindful for people of color, because that's all that we have left as a people. We don't have access to our history. We have stories. So when you exploit that, you re-traumatize a group of people because you're taking away what they have left of their history, of their heritage. So I just wanted to bring that up. Oh, excuse me. Still recovering, you guys, though.
I really respect you bringing that up, Laquita. Culturally, people of color and immigrant populations often rely on storytelling to convey their history, to convey those things. But when we look at how that's conveyed in white dominant culture, their stories are looked at as invalid because it's not like a proper source of documentation. So to have a space of like lifting up the stories on a wider scale, and being able to do something with that, I feel like that is powerful. And it's also like acknowledging people and seeing people, you know, seeing them for their full selves. But thank you for that. You had another point, Laquita, and I guess I'm going to create space for that.
I'm trying not to choke, so you can go ahead and move on without me.
So Rachel, would you like to share something?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tiffany. So for me personally, you know, the project, when it comes to transformation, it's important that people see representation. It's important that there are small wins, that there's a pace built up, there's momentum built up. If we didn't have, if we didn't feel like we were, you know, getting anywhere after the first year, I'm sure Laquita, Tiffany, and I all would have, you know, stepped away from doing this work. But the fact that, we're able to see that those small wins, see those actions being done, we're able to see the work and the transformation happening just from conversation, not even what we're trying to do with the counties and the agencies and institutions, but the transformation that's happening from conversations, transformation that's happening as we do this work. I talk a lot about, I'm talking to people about credit, getting ready for home ownership and things. That's transformative work. Without those small wins, without, seeing your credit score go up 10 points every now and a while, you're going to feel, depressed. You're going to go right back down to, feeling like you're going to give up. So how do we make sure that we're doing things that are showing that transformation while it's happening, and we're not just waiting 4 or 5 years down the road once all the funding is done and all that in order to see that transformation. So when it comes with housing justice, we have to do the same work. We understand it's going to take a lot of money to be able to bring in more housing in our regions. However, there are so many programs already happening where some of that funding can be used in smaller portions to do some of the other transformative work that needs to be done that's being covered up under the rug. So how do we, peel the scab back and really bring transformative work to the housing justice work, as far as increasing our income, as far as improving our credits, as far as also making sure that the services that are being provided are providing these transformative opportunities as well, and not just keeping them stagnant.
Thank you, Rachel. Tiffany, did you raise your hand?
Yes, because I hate feeling like I'm cutting someone off mid conversation I have a hard time tagging me in. It's like double dutching, but let me lower my hand. I definitely can resonate with what you just shared, Rachel. For me, transformation looks like, it means equity, inclusion, racial justice, LGBTQ justice, like creating a space where I need housing, and it shouldn't matter what my identity is, but then also acknowledging like the inequities that make it hard for me to access resources or things that I need to be able to access my basic what should be my basic human right to housing, right? To affordable, safe, diverse, like flexible housing and easy to access. In addition to that, like for me, it also means like incorporating that inclusivity and cultural diversity in service array, and those additional resources that comes with being housed, because we know being housed doesn't just mean, I have a place to stay. It means I also need sustainable employment. It means that I also need other things that are going to help me maintain that. So for me, transformation in housing justice, transformation and housing justice means like completely erasing the mindset of like the stigmas that are associated with housing instability, or lack of advantage in a system that was never built to advantage people and has historically disadvantaged populations and underserved them. So I don't know, for me, it's like stepping up and acknowledging those inequities, like policies that are in place that have continued to set people back, or opportunities that certain populations aren't able to bring, and then that other people aren't able to access. And then like policies that we may have looked at as well-intentioned in the past, that at this point we start to see does not serve people in the way that it was intended to do so. So for me, what I would like to see, because when we look at like fair housing laws and whatnot, what happens is people dance around the marginalized populations, because that's discrimination, right? Like you dance around talking about these specific populations that need that help, that requires equity to be able to, level the playing field. And we dance around those conversations a lot of times because of the fear of discriminating against somebody, but then we fail to realize that that also opens up opportunities for inequity to happen and discrimination to happen, because we're not focusing in on the people who are mostly impacted. And I try not to say, someone called me out on the use of the word underserved, because what does that really implicate when you use that language? You know, so also transforming the language that we use in the process. And so I love when people call me in so that I can learn something and I can, you know, spit it back out so we can keep it moving and improve and whatnot. So I rambled a little bit. But.
No, that was good. I mean, the things that were coming up for me as you were saying, you know, you were sort of describing what all of this has to do with equity. Like, I just kept thinking about like our proximity to the experience of everyday impact of the decisions we're making, the ways in which we're setting up structures, the way in which we're setting up programs and services. If our proximity to it is mostly through how we think about funding requirements, mostly through how we think about policies and regulations and program manuals, right? Like, this is about breaking down that proximity and like getting out of our comfort zone about what it means to do this work and do this work well. And if we say we are doing it in the pursuit of housing justice, it demands that like we be uncomfortable a lot of the time trying to figure out exactly how we do that together. And so I just feel like that's some of the stuff you're calling in, is that it is about like really building collective knowledge and practice of understanding like, how is this impacting people, not through a data spreadsheet, not through an updated report that only comes out once or twice a year, but it is because I am in relationship with my community members who can tell me real time what harm is being caused or what goodness and opportunity is coming out of the decisions I'm helping make. Rivi, I think I saw you get yourself off mute. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm just feeling as fired up as anyone else about this conversation. So so much of this is resonating with me. I think that, like I always say, as a country, systems have been built that have, you know, supposedly the purpose of helping people, human services, right, that are at the very best hugely unwieldy and hard to navigate, and at worst, like actively anti-poor, anti-Black, like actively racist stuff. And I used to always think, like, how do we make human services more human? Like, how do we begin to break apart these like very complex systems by building the power of people with lived experience and being like, they're real people navigate this stuff, are tasked with navigating this stuff. And there's so many reasons that is made so hard. And now I think I'm a little older and a little bit more cynical. And I think that the task is so much larger than even like I used to think like, oh, as long as we can like humanize ourselves as people who've experienced homelessness, that things will change. And I think that's a part of it, right? And that's a part of why storytelling is important here. But now I kind of see that as just one piece of the puzzle. And, you know, Josephine, I feel like we're always talking about like, what does it actually mean to like build community power meaningfully? And I think that's something that like, as a movement, we're always like trying to chip away at, that I'm hoping we get better at and better at over time, right? But it's real and it's messy. And I think that's like a part of what I want to convey here too, is that it's like, it's so much easier to say like, we have this end goal in mind and we will bring people together and we will just like march along step by step to like get to this thing. And I think it's much more difficult, but also much more meaningful to say like, once we come together, we'll set the priorities and we'll move in that direction and we'll iterate and change and shift over time.
Yeah. Thank you, Rivi. I want to practice a thing I asked for, which was folks' engagement with questions and stuff. And it feels like this might be a good time to call in this question for panelists. And I think it's in this moment, it's really your reaction. And I think in the context of transformative language and transformative action, the question is, how do we all feel when community partners house folks experiencing homelessness in high-risk areas? and states that, well, that's really all folks can afford. So that's why we did it that way. I'm paraphrasing, Steve. Thank you for your question. What are folks' reactions to sort of a community's decision to do that, and then sort of framing it as like, well, that's all people can afford? Anyone want to take a stab at it or answer in chat?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, and I'll read it verbatim. So how do you all feel when community partners houses homeless people in high-risk areas and states that's all these homeless people can have?
I'll jump in if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel.
I personally, I see this all the time in the work that I do. And I believe that that's part of why we see folk going back into, recidivism, why we see, and some people say that there's a homeless cycle going on with our supposed housing partners, when that's the policy, or that's their mindset, that's the only quality or location that they're able to be eligible in. So how do we increase who owns property, who's the landlord, who's the who's the agency that houses that resident, whatever the case it may be, and how do we start looking at it from an equitable lens? And again, how do we get people who really want to house and provide supportive services for these homeless people, quote unquote, if the people who are supposed to be doing it see them as less than, and don't value them, and don't believe that they should have adequate housing? So it's more so, how do we stop complaining and begin to activate ourselves and stop looking for someone else to do it, but how do we call those folk who are doing it out and redirect those funds to folk who really want to intentionally do the work? Great question.
Am I off mute?
We can hear you.
Okay, so I want to say that that's all those people can afford, is because that's all we give them. It's a load of BS, to be honest. Like, just to keep in my authentic self, I feel like that's a load of BS, because we need to change our mindset. We give them that because we assume that the reason they don't have a place to stay is because of something by their own fault, by their own hand, by their own doing, which sometimes is the case, but most of the time it isn't. And so you assume, well, if they weren't stable enough, responsible enough to have a nice place, then this is where we'll put them. It's redlining at its finest is what it is. We don't want to say we're just going to keep poor people and Black people and, those heathenist LGBTQ people in an area, but that's what we're doing. Like, that's what happens. You're not responsible. You don't deserve this. It's a mindset. It's a systems mindset that has to be changed. And until we can have some mutual respect for people as humans and not look at necessarily their past, but their current situation, it's going to be a vicious cycle of putting poor people in places where they have no room other than to be like a crab in a barrel, pulling each other down, constantly repeating the cycle of violence, drug addiction, and it causes trauma. So some of this mental illness that people might be experiencing might be forced upon them just by being in the situations that they're in.
Mm.
Yep, goes back to that point of that cycle. It's that cycle, and it's intentional. So that's what some of these systems are doing to us intentionally. So I just wanted to bring that back up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate just the doubling down too, right? About like, we need to turn our eye to like the structural, the system, and the accountability back to the system for carrying on these narratives and using it to create such oppressive sort of opportunities and policy. Tiffany, you look like you have a thought, and I'm going to ask you to say it succinctly, because I want us to keep chugging.
I can speak, or you want me to wait? I can wait. I don't have to say it.
All right, let's just transition a little bit, because people are starting to ask for help. There was a question that just came up in the chat, so we'll come back to that question in our closing thoughts about what it means to continue to do this work, because none of that has stopped. That second question around doing this work in the midst of COVID and racial justice and collaboration fatigue. So we'll save that. Kim, if you could help us transition to the next slide, where we spend some time just thinking about what it means for folks to be doing this in community. So really carrying on the conversation we were just having. So Tiffany, if you want to kick us off, but what we had done was spent some time thinking about what does it mean to lean into this value, lean into this practice? And we were thinking about it in terms of capacity. What does capacity look like? What does readiness look like? And what accountability looks like? And so would love, Tiffany, maybe you can get us started in how we were thinking about what it means to continue to do this work related to capacity, readiness, and accountability.
Thank you, Josephine. So one of the things I wanted to lift up is familiarizing yourself with what the change process is, like thinking through what that actually is and how that is implemented in real life. The next thing is like centering the people who are impacted by the issue. So not just their voice and knowledge, but literally value those people and create space to work alongside them in partnership, as Rachel mentioned, and then value their expertise. Pay those people, because in order for them to elevate, they also need to be paid for the same work that someone who may have just professional or educational expertise comes to the space and gets paid a lot of money for. The next thing is creating brave spaces where people can step in and be fearless when they enter that space. Where people can authentically show up as themselves and be where you can also be uncomfortable and sit in that uncomfortability so that change can actually happen. So for me, what does it mean to be ready? It also means like understanding that you don't know everything, that sometimes you're going to have to step back and just resonate with things. Mm-hmm. And then also like know that it also know that you may not be the expert in it, but that does not mean that you can't collaborate and work with people who are experts in that. As far as accountability, I feel like what happens is like systems know the harm that they've done and they dance around it. People who work for systems sometimes get that backlash because of the fact of the harm that the system has done. But I think what's always been like really helpful for me is when a person when that can be acknowledged, and then we can move from there, you know, because until that's done, it's really hard for a person with lived expertise to build trust if you're going to sit here and dance around the fact, knowing you created harm, but dance around that instead of acknowledging it and then making amends to whatever capacity and moving forward. And lastly, also the DIE and low barrier concept, like accessibility is also a part of like being inclusive, and having low barrier resources, services, and a trust mindset also helps with servicing people. So for me, like, I feel like I flourished the most when I was not restricted greatly in being able to use a resource for what I felt I needed it for, and my family was able to benefit from that. And I think that touches on the question you were asking earlier, Josephine, which is what I wanted to touch on. I don't think it's just like people's fault or like, oh, it's just like if you put somebody in an area with high barrier, like meaning you're over policing them, you're requiring all of these things of them, and then you're making them feel like it's not a lot of resources. How do you think they're going to respond to that? They're going to be overprotective. They're going to be survival mode, and survival mode, but to a certain extent doesn't do anyone any good. After a certain point, you have to learn how to transition from that into thriving. So for me, what readiness also means is being able to not just like get people to a place of like surviving, but helping people navigate from that space into being able to thrive and, you know what I'm saying, move past like and overcome their situations. Because services and resources oftentimes, it doesn't allow you to do that. Yeah, be quiet.
Please don't ever be quiet, but let's see what Laquita or Rachel looks ready. Tell us, Rachel.
Yeah, I keep it brief. You know, when it comes to, you know, myself personally, how I would look at, you know, capacity, readiness, accountability, and then how I would expect someone who has the power to help, you know, change things to approach it would be to simply, you know, stick to the word, you know, doing what you say you're going to do. I've had times where, you know, even I am a victim of it, where I say I'm going to do something, but it doesn't happen, you know, so sticking to your word is most important. So I say that to say, be where you are asked to be, you know, whether it's in the Zoom call, in the board meeting, and, you know, one-on-one session, whatever the case it may be, and being genuine and respectful of others' people's time and following through is one of the biggest things that a lot of us do not do. We have that one-off meeting and we never follow up with the person. We never follow up with whatever that task is, that action item is that we need to do, whether it's us as providers or whether it's a client, a participant. We have to make sure that we're following up. Those next steps are key. So I say all that to just make sure that we are being who we say we're going to be, and doing what we say we're going to do, and coming ready. And another word I would replace for accountability would be intentionality as well. So all of those same bullet points go into intentionality. I think that's also as important as accountability when it comes to this work, is making sure that there is something intentional coming out of it. And it's, again, not just something that we did, but we forgot about it after a year, or we're no longer doing it. It's no longer relevant.
If I can just sort of get onto that point too, like I so appreciate that point around just like what it means to have integrity and what that means for kind of power building, because I think my work used to be kind of helping communities get youth action boards started, right? And so much of people's questions would be like, I can't get people to show up, or I can't get people to come back, or whatever else. And I think so often people's kind of knee-jerk response to that would be like, how do I crack down on this? Or like, how do I make it required for people to come? And I would always say, like, let's take a few steps back and say, like, people show up to the spaces where they know they will be impactful. Like, people show up to the spaces where they see themselves in the work and their impact is reflected back at them. And that to me feels like a part of that integrity piece that always gets left behind. And just to kind of connect the dots too, to, you know, historically people who are homeless and their involvement in the work, right? Like, at best, a lot of that was, you know, focus groups or listening sessions in which they offer up their deep and meaningful visions for the future. And none of that ever gets reflected back. None of that is ever like, hey, that was used to this to get this money, or that was used to like start this. So much of that is often left kind of by the wayside. And that to me, so much of what Rachel was saying is so, feels so important here, because yeah, so much of that feels key to building this stuff.
Yeah, I'll just add, and then we had a question around small wins, but I think the way that, as someone who holds power at the beginning, as someone who holds the decisions around what the process will look like right at the beginning, I think it is my responsibility, when I think about what the relationships I want to have, is that I'm not getting in relationship with Tiffany to finish this product. I'm getting in a relationship with Tiffany because 3 years from now, I want to be celebrating significant transformation. And 5 years from now, I want us to be calling about our kids just because, not because we have hard work to do, but because of the progress we've made, right? And so it's like my capacity and my readiness and my accountability today, I don't just think about it in terms of like, what are we trying to accomplish in the next 3 months? But I'm thinking like, what is the relationship I want to have over the next decade? Because we are going to be in this work together, and it may not be an everyday situation. And I think sometimes in our in our professional, it's kind of like embedded. It's like, oh yeah, you're here, I'm here, we work here. Of course, we'll be together in the future, right? Like we don't, it's just sort of not taken for granted, but just sort of like, it's not something we pause to think about. Whereas when we are integrating this value into our work, it requires us to think about that, because the burden is more explicit and it's more, it has to be more tangible in order for someone to trust coming into a relationship with me as the person who holds the power at the start. I think this goes back to some of the things you were talking about, Rachel, but Jennifer asked, like, what were some of the short-term wins that helped build energy and power in the work we've all been doing over the last year and a half?
Absolutely. I'll speak from a personal standpoint and a group standpoint. For personal standpoint, for me was, again, making sure that I'm taking something away from every meeting, every conversation, reflecting, making sure if I have a resource, bringing that resource to my group so that the folk in that group can tap into it. You know, whether it's business ownership, whether it's a rental resources, whatever the case it may be. And then I'm talking from a personal standpoint as well, is for me, purchasing a multifamily house, duplex in the midst of the work that we were doing. It wasn't really a small one. That's a big win personally, but how can I then take this property that I have and turn it to a resource and an asset for those that I'm working with as well? You know, how can so-and-so who's struggling with gaining housing, who's part of this collective or who knows someone, how can I let them know about this resource I have? And now, you know, as a landlord who's willing to lower his barriers to for that family individual to access housing, how do I let them know about that opportunity? So it doesn't always have to be a check being cut. It doesn't always have to be, you know, huge wins. Those small wins are important. And again, how do we keep people engaged? How do we keep people energized? How do we measure, you know, and keep metrics of what success is? And as we're trying to get to the bigger goal.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, we have just a little bit over 15 minutes with the folks that have joined us this afternoon. So I want to spend a little bit of time just having folks, whether reflecting in chat or if Kim, I might need your help. If someone wants to come off mic, we, you know, folks have been great sharing some of their real-time reflections. But as we think about, like, why'd you join this call? What were you hoping to get out of it? What can you take back, right? What are small wins that you can celebrate and build on based on this conversation today? We wanted to just spend some time checking in with y'all to hear kind of how does this conversation help set you up for the next conversation you're going to have in your community, or a goal you have around co-designing and collaborating with community members with lived expertise in your community. I'm gonna go to chat, and Kim, can folks just take themselves off mute? I should have asked you that earlier.
Yeah, so if folks would like to come off of mute, just raise your little digital hand and I can make that happen for you.
Thank you. And feel free if you would like to even just share some of just one thing you might be taking away from this conversation, or a question you have about how to take this conversation back to your team, back to a team member, back to an effort you are in the midst of.
And I see we have a hand up and from our scene, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Awesome, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Can you guys hear me okay?
We sure can.
Wonderful, it's a pleasure to meet, I guess, all of you. Thank you so much for this meeting. It's been so helpful for me. We have so much going on here in the Glendale COC, and all the information and feedback that you guys provided today. I have so many questions, but I'll narrow it down. So we really need a lot of help here. We're trying to do the best that we can. We're really trying to plan around all this. We're doing our racial equity, you know, our analysis, pulling a lot of data, doing a lot of work, but we're about to embark on this new opportunity. It's a racial equity demonstration project that the state is helping us be a part of, but we're struggling to secure folks with lived experience, people who we want to hear from. And we can't do this without their input. Our main reason for doing this is we want that participation, that involvement, the support. So I just wanted to ask all of you, what can we do to encourage our community members who are in either our existing programs or have graduated from our programs to be more involved. We've tried everything we possibly can to reach out to our service providers. We're struggling. So I just wanted to hear from you guys on what we can do here in Glendale to bring on more participants.
Thanks so
one-
much for your question.
Well, this has been incredible.
Laquita, were you ready?
Yes, I was just going to say, for one thing, you could have it be a partnership and not participation, because like we have constantly said, the feeling of sitting as a token, because they don't, it's hard to trust agencies at this point. So to create a partnership as opposed to participation would be helpful to get that relationship going, because for so many years it's been trauma after trauma, repeat offense. And so to say, hey, I want you to participate, well, what does it benefit me? I might get a gift card, big whoop. But what does it benefit me? What does it benefit my community? How is it going to be impactful?
Thank you, Laquita.
Excellent.
Tiffany, you want to jump in?
Yes. One is pay them young people, or pay them people. I'm always advocate pay them people. The next thing is you need to bring them in to figure out, like, they need to be a part of designing it from start to finish. It doesn't feel good to be pulled in once you have a plan. You know what I'm saying? Like, bring them in, see how, like, what they feel like the process should, like, maybe there are things that they can't change, like if there's a timeline on the you know what I'm saying, on the project or whatever, but the other things that you have to relinquish control and create a space where they can come in and really inform that process, and even be placed into roles where they can help lead that process as well, so that it's not just like the providers or the state leading it, but again, as Rachel and Laquita keep emphasizing, they can be in partnership with the young people or impacted people who of course, as you acknowledge, their input is vital. So again, pay them people, and then also don't just bring them in for a piece of what you want to get done, but actually bring them in so they can design what that actually looks like. So you might want to start with a listening session or something, focus groups or something, to be able to get that feedback on the design process. And then also creating opportunities for professional development. So if it doesn't matter if it's a young person or an adult, like, if this is something that they can put on their resume and, like, you know what I'm saying, like, grow in as well, then that also is another, like, plus to helping mobilize people from just being like someone who receives a service, a resource, or just inform the process, to being someone who's seen as a respected expert in a specific area. So you can help shift that narrative as well.
Agreed. The only thing I would add to that is just being a little bit more creative with the marketing outreach. How do we, make this interesting for folk who are in survival mode all the time? So I would definitely say, in addition to everything that's been said, definitely just look back at your strategic plan and how are you approaching these folk? What creative outlets are you using? Are you using print, social media? Are you using radio, etc.? Are you using social media apps like TikTok, which is new for young people? And then again, how do you reach those folk who may not be media and digital literacy, making sure that you're, just putting these resources in the access point in places where they just may not have a smartphone or the internet available.
One last thing, I'll be quiet. Provide them with the technology if they need it. Right now, we are in the middle of COVID. If they don't have access to that resource, then they're unlikely to participate. If you can help provide resource for technology, I know the forum, they gave Chromebooks. You know what I'm saying? Like, different spaces I've been in, they're giving the technology so that people can be able to fully engage and participate. And then also like for things like cross systems collaboration, like there's resources for broadband assistance and different things like that. Connect the people to those things so that even if you can't provide every little thing that they may need, you're at least connecting them to a resource that can help them engage in what you're hoping to get out of it as well.
Great, thanks so much. Oh, Rivi, you want to add one more thing?
Sure. Yeah, if there's time. Yeah, I think these are all such good points. And just to expound on some of that, I think like another thing Josephine and I are often talking about is just like how, you know, and also has been a theme of these conversations is like, how do you be super clear about what an opportunity is and also allow space for people to be involved and work in a way that plays to their strengths, that plays to their skills, you know? And so to me, I'm always like on the beat of like, how do you really outline what that opportunity is, be super clear about pay up front, be super clear about who you are looking for in that, and also say like, we are going to craft this around what your skill set is. And in addition to things like considering providing tech, it's also like, asking people what kind of mediums they are most comfortable communicating in. I know Tiffany's a caller, you know, Josephine's a FaceTimer, you know, like it's like knowing people's preferences about how they want to communicate feels so important in that. And I'll just say too, like, I think that people can be so rooted in scarcity when it comes to thinking about their own resources that they have to give in terms of paying people with lived experience. And I don't think that's what you're saying, but I've seen it kind of time and time again. But it's like, can we just think with some abundance about how people are compensated for their work? Like, I think that can show up both in rate, and that can also show up in how that pay is structured. So I think in some of our work recently, we've done it like, rather than people, you know, logging an hour and getting paid for that hour, it's more like, can we give you a standard pay that's like the absolute maximum amount of hours that you could be expected to work? And then like, if life things come up, and I mean, which everybody is so extra, you know, exposed to right now, like, you know, our lives are all over the place. And so like, how do you build that kind of stability for people, you know, like these kinds of incentives and these kinds of things that say like, it's not just about you clocking in and clocking out, like we are investing in you, and we'll provide opportunities for any kind of capacity building or learning that you identify. And we're not just like extracting information from you or extracting work from you. It's not transactional like that, but rather, you know, reciprocal.
Yeah. Oh, so jazzed up. I want to keep going, but we can't. You're not hoarding the chat, and you're saying you're affirming, you're adding to the combo, you're asking questions. Kim, I apologize for not being the best advancer supporter here. Would you advance 2 slides to the closing thoughts? I forgot we had a slide for that. The combo was just too good to worry about slide advancement. But I want to be mindful of time. We've got about 4 minutes. I didn't see any other hands. Just want to make sure. Yep.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to point out we have 2 hands. So Marcellus has had their hand up for a minute, so okay. I will allow them to talk.
Absolutely. Hi there.
And Marcellus, you should be able to unmute now.
Hello? I might not be, can you hear me?
We sure can. What's up?
You hear the background noise?
Don't worry about it. Go ahead.
All right, my name is Marcellus Morris. I work for Rain for Life. And I just want to say this was a great meeting. But we have some serious racial issues inside of Nassau County dealing with housing. And one of the things I really noticed is this hotel scheme where they're putting these individuals inside these hotels, but they're not providing any services. So I went to visit one of the dudes in the hotel. He got 2 other people living with him inside the hotel room from the bus terminal. Because now you don't have to go back to your shelter. You can miss a couple days. So when they miss a couple days, they're piling inside this hotel room, and it's like, God knows what. Now you put somebody, now one more point. Now
go ahead.
Huh? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, are there opportunities to do some feedback sessions to check in as a group of residents, how that experience is going and what resources and services are needed?
Like I said, I think somebody should just make a documentary. Just give somebody a camera and document these people in real-time situations. So that way, when the politicians, when the funders, when the hotel people see what's going on, now we can have these meetings, but they're going to want to do something about it because it doesn't look good for DSS. It doesn't look good for the politicians that we are one of the richest counties, but we have a homeless problem and we're not addressing it. The answers are right there on the table. Exodus House sets up shop right inside the hotel and motels. So now the person has some support when he come through the door. Instead of a liquor store right next door, instead of the dude next door got crack, the dude up the hall got weed, and the other one selling bootleg or whatever the case is. So if you really look at that, that's madness. That's straight madness, and I see it for real. You also have these slum landlords that come out here, open these houses, figure out that they can't get the emergency shelter rate, and then they just close them down. Or they'll leave the people inside the house. I got 2 houses like that right now, where the landlord came, tried.
Oh, you just went on mute, Marcellus. I just wanted to say, folks are affirming that experience of seeing folks not move out of hotels into longer term housing opportunities. And I think to our colleagues for the framework, this seems like a hot topic, just watching what's happening in chat. And I also want to say it's really an opportunity to also organize folks impacted by this, right? Like, how are we leaning into their leadership in thinking about what the calls to action are, what the opportunity for them to talk directly with their political leaders in their community. So I'm just pitting this for our framework leadership team. It seems like something we could circle back around sometime this year. Thank you, Anne. I see Anne's confirming that. Kim, did we have one more person before we start closing our thoughts?
We do. We have Alice, so I'm going to give them permission to talk. Alice, you should be able to unmute now.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, Alice.
Our state meeting for Homeless Coalition is we were invited, our lived experience people, our little committee that we started, advisory committee. We were invited to participate, and our little coalition decided we want to do our story, tell our stories, different stories. And I was wondering if you could give any tips on what we should do when we're talking to a whole group of people that service homeless throughout the state.
Yeah, Tiffany, I wonder if we could start with you, knowing your experience speaking and driving to action at state level.
Can you repeat your question, please? I'm so sorry. I heard you, but can you reframe it one more time? And then I can answer your question. Sorry.
Sure. We're looking at doing our storytelling at a state level homeless coalition meeting, the annual meeting. And we just wanted to have some tips on how to present that without harming the ones that would be speaking.
So for me, one thing is people share what they want to share. Don't force them to share anything that they don't feel comfortable sharing. Setting the tone where it's like the people who are decision makers have to listen. And so that's what that does, is it shifts like the power dynamic. So if like a person who, when you're saying that the people who are in those decision-making roles or leadership roles or who hold the power have to sit in a space and take it in, and they're like the people who are speaking are the experts, then it shifts that power dynamic. In addition to that, prepping young people before they start, or prepping people with that. I always say young people because I'm always like, youth homelessness, youth this, that, and third. But prepping people before they come into the space and checking in with them to see what they need to be able to do that work before entering that space. In addition to that, allowing those people to decide like what their medium is, like how they, like Rachel dropped in the chat, like there are people who are more creatives, and don't invalidate like what medium they prefer to present that in, or how creative or not creative, however, like whoever defines creative, but how they want to convey their story. And then also like creating a space where their stories aren't invalidated, and they don't have to answer questions about it. They don't have to prove that this is truth. If they're sharing it and that's what they say their truth is, then that's their truth. And paying them, I'm sorry, paying them for what, I always emphasize that, because people doing the work do not feel like it's important to pay people, and they're bringing their expertise. Pay those people, pay them, not as a sense of, like Rivi said, like, you do this, I do this, but this is like a reciprocal, cohesive relationship. You're valued and you contributed something that was valuable, but also like your time that you put into it. And then also exploring opportunities for healing in that process. So like right now I'm planning a watch session, but in that watch session, there's a lot of traumatizing stuff, and things that have impacted like our communities. And so I had to be very thoughtful about how do I provide support or resources for people after watching that, and how do I prep them before something like that. Like, we have to look at things from like a trauma-informed, healing-centered lens when we're doing anything with like storytelling as well, because it's not just like positive things that come out of storytelling. It's a lot of shared trauma, and you're asking people to re-traumatize themselves in that process. So
I am sitting here feeling so grateful for what we're able to get into in the hour and a half. And then also like, we could have a part 2 of this. There is so much more to get into. And we are out of time. I want to be respectful that this was the time we allotted. And I'll just close us out by saying, like, for folks that are still here and for folks that already left, we're so grateful that you found this valuable and a good use of being able to just sit in reflection about what it means to do this work, do it well, and do it in a just and respectful way. We are so grateful for your time. Thank you so much. The webinar and the recording will be posted. Tiffany, Rivi, Laquita, and Rachel, I don't know my work without y'all, but I'm so grateful for this dedicated time that we had together. Jason's asking for a part 2. I love it. So grateful for y'all, and for everybody else. Keep up the good work. Let's continue to be in principled struggle together, and let's continue to advance all of our communities towards housing justice. Peace, and have a great afternoon. Thank you so much, everybody.